I used to think trust was something you could fold carefully and keep in a drawer, a soft thing that waited for you exactly where you left it. My grandmother taught me that. She has a way of making virtues feel tangible, like the smell of camphor in her wardrobe or the weight of a teacup balanced on 3 fingers. When she pressed the little red envelope into my palm after graduation, her thumb lingering over my knuckles the way she used to when I was a child refusing medicine, I felt the old warmth bloom behind my ribs. "For your start," she said, and in our dialect that means more than money. It means a path, a small promise that the ground ahead will hold. She didn't trust banks or screens, only people. So she handed the cash to my father with the same faith I was raised to treat as oxygen. He'd keep it safe for now, he said. I didn't question the arrangement because I still belonged to the part of the world where questioning your father is confused with failing your duty. Yesterday I asked for it. Not even the whole amount, just enough to buy a laptop before the back-to-school sales ended, the kind of practical indulgence I could defend if anyone demanded an essay. I caught him on a neutral afternoon after lunch, when the house was lazy and the air was too heavy to carry anyone's temper. I said, "Dad, can you transfer the graduation money? I found a good deal." He didn't look up from his phone. He just said, "It's gone," like the word was a door closing gently in another room. I thought I'd misheard. I said, "My money?" And he shrugged without shame, the way you do when a mosquito escapes your swat. "I used it," he said. "You live here, you eat, you shower, electricity costs money." The new laptop link on my screen blurred. I did the math too fast and too slow, $1. 4K is not a fortune, but it is a plan when you don't have income yet, when the entire future is a spreadsheet of grants and tuition pages. I said, "You didn't ask me," and he said, "You're being dramatic," and somewhere beneath my sternum something fine and old snapped. The fight spread like oil in water, silent at first, then slick and everywhere. My mother joined from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel like she could scrub the conversation into something cleaner. "He's your father," she said, the phrase tossed into the room like a wet rag that's supposed to smother flames. "Everything we have goes to you anyway. School, rent, groceries. Why are you counting?" I said. "Because it was mine," and I heard how thin I sounded, how dangerously Western, as if individual ownership were arrogance. In our house, the list of things I was supposed to be began with filial, as though the word itself was a key that locked my mouth into gratitude no matter the theft. My mother's eyebrows pinched into that expression that means I've become a disappointment without saying so. "Your grandmother's money is family money," she said. "She gave it to you because we have carried you this far." It's strange how a sentence can feel like a hand around your throat and a hug at once. I told them I wanted part of it back, just enough to keep the promise I'd made to myself about not falling behind before I'd even started the next degree. My father said he had nothing to give, and when I didn't soften quickly enough, when I kept standing there with my face arranged around an adult insistence, he added, almost cheerfully, "If you want it, I'll have to sell my last gold bar." I didn't know which part of that sentence I was supposed to hold. Last, gold, bar, only that somehow he had put the weight of his deprivation on top of my request, making me the greedy one for asking to be returned the gift that had my name on it. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked, and he said, "Do you hear yourself? Talking to me like a creditor." I told my grandmother. I did it carefully, because she believes words can rot fruit if you say them with the wrong intention. I called in the late afternoon when her favorite radio soap plays, so her blood pressure would be busy with someone else's tragedy. I said, "Popo, the money you gave me, Baba used it without asking," and she made that soft clucking sound that used to precede sweets, not scolding. "Ayaya," she said. "If it went to your study, then good." I closed my eyes. In the next room, my parents were talking in low voices about electricity and water and my attitude. "He said it went to the house," I told her. "He said he has nothing now." She was quiet for a long time. I could hear her teacup settle on the saucer. "Family shares," she said at last, more to herself than to me. "Don't fight." I could feel the sawdust of that old lesson in my mouth. I tried to swallow and it stuck. If money were only math, I could have let it go. But the more I touched the thought, the more it stung. It wasn't the dollar amount. It was the shape of the taking. The part where they didn't ask. The part where they called it help afterward, as if the rename absolved the act. The part where every objection of mine was reframed as ingratitude until my words stood in the corner ashamed of themselves. I thought about the way my father had turned my grandmother's faith into a subtraction, and I wanted to be unfilial for once, loudly, like a door slamming, like a girl choosing herself at the expense of a proverb. Instead, I did something small. I drew a line. "I want a third back by tomorrow," I told him that night when the corridor felt long enough to stretch between us. 400, I'll figure out the rest." He laughed. "I have nothing," I said, then sell the gold bar, and felt the number of my ancestors judging me multiply. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're threatening me?" he asked, and my mother gasped because threatening is a word we only ever used for outsiders. You know we were going to sponsor your master, he added after a moment, conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe you should learn how expensive you are. The next morning, I woke to the obligations they had trained me to keep. I cleaned the dishes, because God forbid a girl with opinions leaves evidence. I checked the admissions pages for the American programs I dared to dream about, and then looked up the tuition as if daring were an accounting trick. The numbers were taller than I felt. My father went to work. My mother swept the already clean floor. My grandmother called to tell me her soap had ended happily, that the daughter who ran away had come back to cook for her mother. Good girl, she said, with the bright satisfaction of a lesson confirmed. After lunch, I opened a tab and typed, "Can international students get loans in the US?" and read until the words blurred into each other. Federal loans, no. Private loans, maybe, if you find an American cosigner willing to tether their credit to a stranger's risk. My father's voice in my head. You want money? Ask your husband when you get one. When the house napped, I took out a notebook and made 2 columns. What I could control and what I couldn't. Under control, I wrote applications, portfolio, test scores, part-time work that wouldn't break me. Under cannot, I wrote the past, other people's consciences, definitions of filial piety invented by men who never washed dishes. I was still looking at my list when my father came home and dropped his keys on the shoe cabinet the way he always does, as if the sound were proof the day belonged to him. So, he said, in the tone reserved for verdicts, are you going to be sensible? My mother stood behind him like a ghost of compliance. For a second, I saw 3 generations stacked like plates. The old woman who forgives because it's simpler, the man who takes because it is available, the woman who cleans because otherwise she is bad. I'm asking for what's mine, I said. My voice surprised me, lower, steadier. And I'm telling you that if you keep it, I'll find another way to pay for school, loans, scholarships, jobs, but I'm not going to pretend this is okay. He smiled then, the kind that is mostly teeth. You think America will give you money? You think strangers will be kinder than your father? He shook his head, amused. You're naive. Maybe, I said, but strangers have rules. He made a sound like a scoff, and a cough had a child. You want your 400. He opened his wallet, showed me the flat leather like a magician revealing a clean hand. Nothing. You want me to sell my last gold bar? For your laptop? For your pride? Then you don't need me for your master. He said it lightly, as if withholding a future were a reasonable consequence for a daughter who'd asked for a present to remain a present. Choose, he added, generous as a king. Now, it wasn't a real choice. It was a script he expected me to read from, one where I apologize for forgetting my place, where I say I was wrong to speak to him like a creditor, where I earn back my sponsorship with silence. I looked past him at my mother's face, hopeful, pleading, terrified of any world where she isn't the hinge that swings us back into harmony. You can't do this, she whispered, but to me or to him, I couldn't tell. My father was already walking toward the bedroom, calling over his shoulder, Masters, we'll see. Depends on whether you're a good daughter tomorrow. That night, sleep crawled in pieces across my bed and fell off the edges. I thought about emailing the admissions offices to ask about deferrals, about the timeline for deposits, about whether the programs that had felt like doors would stay open for a girl from a country where doors are family property. Around 3, when the lights of the neighbors' flats turned into dots on a grief map, I drafted a message to my grandmother and deleted it. I drafted one to the head of the program, whose brochure I'd hidden under a stack of my father's newspapers, and I deleted that too. I wrote to myself instead, you are not unfilial. You are trying to step into the life someone saved for you. Gifts are meant to be used by the person they're given to. The sentence looked ridiculous on the page, like the kind you tape to a mirror and pretend not to read every morning. At dawn, the apartment was the brittle kind of quiet that comes when everyone is pretending to be asleep, so no one has to be first to be human. My father moved in the next room. I heard the click of the wardrobe, the soft clink of something metal placed carefully into a pocket. A stupid, wild hope rose in me. Maybe he would sell the gold bar after all. Maybe shame had poured him a cup of reason. I brewed tea for my grandmother and a different kind of tea for myself, bitter for courage. At 8, my phone vibrated. A bank notification lit the screen. Incoming transfer, $400. I stared at the number until I could feel heat in my face. My father's name in the memo line, and then, like a cufflink snapped on, a message in the family chat. Daddy sent you. Be good. Don't shame the house anymore. My first impulse was gratitude, the reflex of a body trained to thank a hand even after it slaps. My second was relief, practical, humiliating. I could buy the laptop. I could breathe for a week. My third was rage pure enough to polish metal. Don't shame the house anymore. As if all this time, what was rotting wasn't the beam in the middle, but my insistence on pointing at it. I bought the laptop. I applied to the programs. I printed the scholarship requirements and taped them above my desk like a shrine. And still, the thought I had tried to keep folded in the drawer kept slipping out and wandering the room. If this is what they do with a gift that has my name on it, what will they do with a future that does? In the evening, my grandmother called to ask whether the tea she gave me last week was making my sleep softer. I told her the truth that wouldn't hurt. "It helps," I said. She laughed in that gummy, delighted way that turns every call into a prayer. "Good girl," she said again. After dinner, my father sat across from me and switched on the news, volume low, the announcer's voice buzzing like a mosquito we were all trying to ignore. He didn't speak until the end of the hour, when the credits crawled and the room felt briefly ownerless. "We'll talk about the master," he said, eyes still on the screen. "I don't like being threatened." I almost asked if asking for your own money was a threat now, but I saved my energy for forms and essays and universities that would know how to read my name without deciding it meant property. "Okay," I said instead. He nodded like a man who had been reasonable all along. At 10, when the house relaxed into the creaks of old pipes and the deep breath of planks minding their own business, my phone vibrated again. An email. "We are pleased to inform you." I read the first paragraph twice, then the second, and in the middle of the congratulations, a line caught my eye hard enough to make it blur. "Tuition deposit due within 14 days. International students must provide proof of funding or an approved loan." 14 days. Proof. Funding. The words rearranged themselves into a dare. I looked toward the bedroom door my parents had closed, toward the drawer where my grandmother kept envelopes that smelled like last winter, toward the window where the city pretended not to hear the way I swallowed. I was still staring at the screen when another message slid in under it. My father, from the next room, as if texting could make his voice kinder. "Tomorrow, you apologize to your mother for shouting. After that, we discuss your future." I put the phone face down and listened to the hum of a life that wanted to be mine and a house that wanted to borrow it. In the morning, I would have to choose what kind of daughter I was willing to be. Tonight, I added up the numbers on the page and realized I might have to choose what kind of person. The morning smelled like boiled ginger and a test I hadn't studied for. My mother put a bowl in front of me without looking up, the steam climbing my face like a reminder to be softer. I had rehearsed the sentence she wanted. "I'm sorry for raising my voice." The addendum I wanted. "I'm not sorry for saying the truth. In our house, apologies are choreography. If you hit your marks, the scene changes." I held the spoon, let the heat settle the shake in my hands, and said it exactly that way. "I'm sorry I shouted last night." My mother's shoulders loosened a fraction. "I'm not sorry for asking for my money." She went still again, like a radio losing the station. "Why do you always need the last word?" she asked. And I didn't say because for 23 years I haven't gotten even the first. After breakfast, I took my tea to my room and opened the acceptance email again, the black text unreasonably calm. 14 days. It was a number I could feel like a throb. I wrote to the program's admin office and asked about assistantships, about teaching or research, about any version of a stipend that made a life possible without begging. I kept the tone professional, the way people write when they want their ambition to sound like a favor. I sent it off and felt like I'd cast a line into a lake where money wore a fish costume. Then I did the thing everyone online said international students should do. I called financial aid and learned that financial aid had 2 nationalities. Federal loans were a door with a sign that said citizens only. Private loans were a door with a smaller sign. Bring an American cosigner to hold the hinge while you pass through. I thanked the woman who told me this, even though she just described a cliff as if it were a curb. At noon, I texted my grandmother to ask if I could bring her bow and sit a while. She wrote back, "Come. Bring extra soy sauce." Her apartment always smells like 5 p.m., even at noon. She opened the door in slippers, her hair like a soft crown of salt. She listened while I described proof of funds as if I were telling a fairy tale to someone who could still believe in magic. She stirred sugar into my tea and tapped the spoon on the rim like the beginning of a spell. "Lil," she said at last, "does not mean you are a purse." The sentence shocked me in its neatness. "It means you are honest with them, with yourself, sometimes with God." She slid a small cloth pouch across the table, the kind that used to hold candies when we left for the long bus to school. Inside, 2 thin bangles winked, the kind that sing against each other when a woman cooks. "No," I said immediately, the word surfacing like a fish. "Just for emergency," she said, closing my fingers around them. "You say you are adult. Then keep your own key." We took a taxi to the bank because my grandmother refuses to step off curbs without company now. At the counter, I opened my own checking account with the kind of posture you practice before job interviews. The clerk was young, bored, and kind in the way strangers can afford to be. My grandmother sat in a chair, purse in her lap, eyes closed like she was taking attendance of her breath. When the clerk slid the new debit card across to me, warm from the machine, I felt something fundamental realign, the smallest click, like a latch finding its strike plate. In the lobby, my grandmother took my wrist and pulled my hand to her cheek. "You will be a good professor," she said, as if the act of opening a bank account had granted me a credential, and I almost cried because that's exactly how faith works in our blood. On the way home, I bought her oranges, the good kind that peel in one move. At her door, she tucked a folded piece of paper into my pocket. "Don't read now," she said. "Make me proud later." It was the bus schedule back to her place, marked in her shaky pen. For a second I thought, absurdly, this is proof of funds too. When I walked into our apartment, my father was sitting like a judge who eats at home. He looked at the bank folder in my hand and smiled without teeth. "Separate account?" he asked lightly. "So Western." I kept my voice even. "So adult." He leaned back the way men do when they want to make the room their chair. "Did you apologize to your mother?" "Yes," I said. "For shouting?" He nodded as if ticking a box. "Good. Then we discuss your future." He tapped his phone, scrolled slowly, voice casual. "The deposit is due in 2 weeks, you said. We will pay it, but I will hold your passport and all official papers until you show me the program is serious." He paused for effect. "And until you make a proper apology." "To you?" I asked, though I knew the script. "To us," he said. "For making a scene. For making us look bad with your grandmother." His phone buzzed. He glanced, smiled. "Your godbrother is in New York now. He says he can help find a cosigner if we need. He knows people." I said, "I don't need a cosigner." And he laughed like I had told him I could grow wings in the bathroom mirror if left alone long enough. "You need me," he said simply, and stood up to end the meeting. I went to my room and laid the 2 bangles on the desk. Their sound when they touched was a small bell for something sacred and rude, self-respect. I was still staring at them when my laptop pinged. A reply from the program administrator, CCing a professor whose articles I'd read at midnight with a pen in my mouth. "We do have a limited number of teaching assistantships. Would you be available for a Zoom chat tomorrow?" Below that, another email arrived fast enough to feel like a door opening from the other side. The professor himself. "I liked your writing sample. Let's talk pedagogy and bandwidth. Funding is competitive, but if you can prove yourself useful, we can try to carve something out." I said, "Oh," out loud to an empty room, the syllable like a match. I replied yes, obviously, with sentences that would make me sound like ammonia. Honest, useful, sharp. Then I went hunting. For syllabi I could volunteer to grade. For digital tools I could set up for a faculty member allergic to dashboards. For proof that I could be someone's right hand, and not by default the kitchen. The rest of the day I was a small, efficient storm of competence. For dinner I ate standing up, noodles in a bowl, the bangles singing every time I reached for the chili oil. My mother watched me from the doorway like I was a new appliance. "You work very hard at pretending you don't need us," she said, and I said, gently, "I work very hard at needing you less." Morning pulled in quietly, the way good news does when it wants to be believed. I ironed a shirt I thought would read as responsible on a pixelated screen. At 9:58 I logged in and watched my face small in the corner while the professor's office appeared. Books like a topographical map, a mug with the department's logo and pen scratches on the ceramic like proof it was older than the current students. He was brisk, dry, funny in the way that makes you want to be trusted. He peppered me with questions. "How do you handle students who think English is war? What's your philosophy about rubrics? Can you spot plagiarism without becoming a cop? How many hours can you work without your visa hatting you?" I answered like I'd been practicing in the shower for years, because I had. From the age of 5 when my father's face asked me pop quizzes in the language of household peace. Halfway through, his mouth did that considering tilt that professors do when they can see where to wedge you into the machine. "We could use someone to manage the course site and hold tutoring hours," he said. "It's modest funding, partial tuition waiver, small stipend, if we can swing it." He looked at me over the rim of the mug. "But I need to know you won't collapse." "I don't collapse," I said. He nodded. "Good, we'll advocate." He signed off with a smile a father might reserve for a daughter he's proud of. I sat there after the camera went dark, palms damp, the room suddenly full of air I could spend. At lunch, my father asked, "Interview?" as if the word was a flirtation. "Yes," I said. "He'll try to find funding partial." My father's mouth curled, approval's cheap cousin. "Partial is not enough," he said immediately. "We still decide what is wise." The pronoun caught like a fishbone. "We." His phone buzzed again. He glanced, then tucked it under his palm. "Also," he added casually, "your aunt says you were at the bank with Popo. Don't take advantage of an old woman's soft heart." "I opened my own account," I said. "That's all." He held my gaze a second too long. "That's not all," he said softly, and I realized he had decided my adulthood was a personal insult. I went to the door of the cabinet where we keep our documents. The ugly faux mahogany cupboard near the shoe rack that has, at various times, contained rice, candles, and all the ways to prove you exist. The handle turned easy, the door swung, the shelf smelled like paper and the small animal panic of stamps. I reached for the plastic folder where my passport always lay, its navy cover glinting like a bruise. My hand closed on air. The folder was there. The place where the passport should have pressed a shallow rectangle into cheap plastic was smooth. I checked the other shelf, the other file, the drawer where expired coupons go to die. Nothing. The room was suddenly all edge. "Mom," I called, trying to keep my voice neutral and failing. "Did you move my passport?" She came from the kitchen, wiping her hands, panic already rising like steam. "Your father has it," she said too fast. "For safekeeping." "Where?" "In the safe. Give me the key." She swallowed. "He has it." I walked to the living room. My father didn't look up from the TV. "Give me my passport," I said. He muted the sound and turned with exaggerated slowness as if I were a commercial interrupting his program. "It's not yours," he said. "It belongs to the family until we decide it should leave." "It is literally and legally mine," I said, and heard how useless the law sounded in this room. He shrugged, generous tyrant. "When you apologize properly and agree to our conditions, you can have it back. We'll pay the deposit. We'll handle the visa. We'll speak to your professor if we like him." He smiled like a man explaining gravity. "Otherwise, no." My throat went dry so fast I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. "You can't do that," I said, and I could feel the plea infecting the sentence like a fungus. He stood, walked past me to the cabinet, closed its door with 2 fingers and patted it like a pet. "Watch me," he said, and the word was all Cliff. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't look. He stepped close enough for me to smell the mint on his breath. "Tomorrow, you will be a good daughter," he said, "or you will be an unemployed girl with a dream and no papers." He sat down, unmuted the TV, and the room filled with someone else's news. I walked to my room and shut the door quietly because rebellion is louder when you make it deliberate. My phone was still buzzing, insistent. I looked. An email from the professor. "Good talk. I've put your name forward. If approved, you'll get a partial tuition waiver and a $1,000 month stipend. It's not everything, but it's proof of seriousness. Can you confirm you'll be able to be here in August?" Under it, another email from the program. "Funding committee meets Friday. They may ask for confirmation of visa progress." And a third, from an address I didn't recognize, but that made my chest tighten. "The university's international office. Please upload your passport copy to initiate your I-20. I sat on the edge of the bed, the bangles cold in my palm, and understood exactly what kind of war my father had chosen. The kind where you don't raise your voice, you just move a document and call it love. I could see my grandmother's neat bus schedule poking from my notebook pocket. I could feel the 14 days winding down like a clock someone else set. I opened a new note and wrote, "Tomorrow, find a safe of my own." Then I typed to the professor, "Yes, I can be there. I will confirm visa progress shortly." My thumb hovered over send, and I looked toward the wall where a thin rectangle of light from the window cut across the paint like a path to a door I could not yet open. I hit send. Then I texted my grandmother, "Are you home tomorrow morning? I need a witness." The morning light in my grandmother's kitchen had the exact patience that I lacked. It always did. Slow, forgiving, golden like the surface of soup that hasn't been stirred yet. She made congee, humming a song that I couldn't name but had heard my whole life. I sat across from her, my hands tight around the mug of barley tea, waiting for her to ask why I'd come so early. But she didn't. She never forced words out of me. She just let the silence sit between us until it softened enough for truth to slide out on its own. "Popo," I said finally, "I need to borrow something." Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes sharpened the way they do when she's about to test whether my reasoning has bones. "Money. Documents," I said. "I think Dad took my passport." The spoon paused in her hand. "He keeps it safe," she said automatically, the same sentence I'd heard since I was 17, as though security and control were synonyms. "I need it back," I said. "The university needs a copy to start my visa process." She frowned. "He will give it back when it's time." "I don't have time, Popo. 2 weeks for the deposit. They offered funding. I just need to confirm I can travel." She studied my face for a long time, her gaze careful, as if she could still see the child under the layers of adult defiance. "You are like your mother," she said at last, softly. "Too much heart, not enough patience." I wanted to laugh, but it caught in my throat. "Mom's patience didn't save her," I said quietly. "It just kept her tired." For the first time that morning, she looked old, not in the fragile, fatting way, but in the weary recognition that the world she had built rules for was no longer mine. "You'll break something if you push too hard," she said. "Maybe," I admitted, "but maybe that's the only way to make space for something new." Her gaze dropped to her hands, and when she spoke again, her voice was so small I almost missed it. "I kept a copy," she said. I looked up. "A copy?" She nodded. Of your passport, the one we used when you first went to study abroad. I keep copies of everything, in case things go missing. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Can I have it? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walked to the cabinet near the window, and pulled out an old biscuit tin, the kind that once held Danish cookies but now held the evidence of an entire family's history. She sifted through receipts, letters, expired IDs, and finally, there it was, a crisp photocopy of my passport. Not perfect, she said, but it shows you are real. I took it with both hands, the way you take communion. Thank you, I whispered. She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, like she used to do when I was small. Don't thank me yet, she said. You still have to win. Back home, the house was empty. My parents had gone to the market. The safe was still locked, the faint metallic hum of it behind the cabinet like a held breath. I didn't touch it. I wasn't stupid. The key was probably on his ring and the code in his head. But the copy in my bag was enough for now. Enough to move one piece of paper forward, 1 inch closer to the life that wasn't permitted to exist unless he said so. I scanned the document, uploaded it, and hit submit. The portal blinked twice, then returned to calm blue text. File received. Processing. I stared at the screen until my heartbeat slowed enough to trust it. That night when my father came home, he was in a good mood. He'd sold something at work, I guessed, or maybe he'd convinced himself the previous week's tension had been a misunderstanding that could now be archived. He poured himself a drink, the sound of the ice in the glass too loud in the quiet house. You're quiet, he said. Good thinking. Yes, I said. About your future. Yes. He smiled. Smart girl, you'll see I'm right in the end. Families must plan together. I nodded, but said nothing. He didn't notice the silence had a spine now. 2 days later, the email came. Congratulations. You have been officially awarded a teaching assistantship. Please confirm acceptance and expected arrival date by next week. I read it 3 times before I allowed myself to smile. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation. Proof that I could exist independently of anyone's permission. Proof that someone believed in me enough to pay me for my mind. I printed the letter and hid it in the back of my notebook. That evening, I told my mother. She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "That's good, just good." She sighed. "I'm proud, but your father, he won't see it that way." "Then don't tell him yet," I said. "Please." She looked torn. "Secrets grow teeth," she said softly. "Be careful." I wanted to tell her that I wasn't keeping a secret. I was keeping a promise to myself, but the words would have broken something fragile in her. So I said, "I'll be careful." The next morning, my father came into my room without knocking. "Pack your things," he said. My stomach dropped. "What?" "We're going to see your grandmother." "Now?" He nodded. "She says you've been acting strange. Maybe she can remind you how we do things in this family." The air left my lungs in one sharp exhale. Of course she'd called him. Of course she thought she was protecting me. At her apartment, he sat across from her, his posture rehearsed. "Mom," he said, all gentle concern. "You shouldn't encourage her to make decisions behind our backs." She poured him tea and didn't answer. He tried again. "You know how the world is. She doesn't understand how dangerous it can be for a young girl alone. She needs guidance." I opened my mouth, but my grandmother raised a hand. "Guidance," she said, "is not ownership." The silence that followed was dense enough to chew. He laughed, a short, uncertain sound. "You think you know better than me, Ma." "I don't think," she said. "I've lived long enough to know that control is not love." His face hardened. "You're taking her side." "I'm taking the side of the child who hasn't yet learned how to lie for comfort," she said simply. He stood. "You filled her head with nonsense." She sipped her tea. Then perhaps her head needed filling. He left without another word. The slam of the door a punctuation mark we all expected. I looked at her, throat tight. "He's going to be furious." She smiled faintly. "Let him be. A father's temper burns fast. A daughter's silence burns longer." That night he didn't come home. My mother pretended not to notice. Moving around the kitchen like choreography could keep the world in balance. "He just needs time," she said. I didn't argue. I used the quiet to finish the paperwork. I confirmed my assistantship. I booked the university housing deposit with what was left of my grandmother's graduation gift. I watched the money leave my account with no guilt, just relief that it was finally serving me. When I shut my laptop, the house was dark except for the thin line of light under my parents' door. I could hear my mother murmuring softly on the phone, probably to him, her voice the tone of someone negotiating peace with a ghost. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to keep choosing between us, that her loyalty didn't have to be a rope tying her to his anger. But that would have been another theft, another request she couldn't meet. So instead, I whispered into the dark, "I'll fix this. knowing that fixing no longer meant what it used to. Because for the first time in my life, fixing didn't mean apologizing. It meant leaving. The next morning, I woke to a message from my professor. We'll need a scanned copy of your visa once approved. The I-20 form has been processed. Congratulations again. And beneath that, a message from my father. Come to the living room. Now. I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. Okay. When I stepped out, he was sitting with my passport in his hand. You want this? He asked. Yes. Then tell me why I should give it back. I met his gaze and didn't look away. Because it's mine. He studied me, waiting for me to flinch, for the old reflex to apologize. But I didn't. Maybe you're right, he said finally. Maybe it is yours, but don't forget who kept it safe all these years. I won't, I said. I'll remember exactly what safe meant. He placed it on the table between us. Then take it. But once you do, don't expect me to clean up whatever happens next. I picked it up. I never did, I said. And for the first time, I saw it, the smallest flicker of confusion in his eyes. Like he was realizing the script had changed, and he didn't know his next line. That night, I packed my bag quietly. Not to leave yet, just to see how it felt. The passport, the bangles, the acceptance letter. 3 proofs of identity. The person I was born as, the person my grandmother believed in, and the person I chose to become. When I zipped the bag shut, the sound was louder than any apology I'd ever given. And for once, I didn't feel like a bad daughter. I felt like a free one. The first thing I noticed in America was the silence. Not the kind I'd grown up with, the suffocating quiet of a household waiting for one person's temper, but the wide, breathing silence of space. Airports here didn't hum with the same constant chorus of languages. People moved slower, their footsteps cushioned by carpets instead of tile. No one's eyes followed me like a duty. The graduate housing office smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. A kind student worker handed me a set of keys and a campus map that might as well have been a new alphabet. You're in Building E, 3rd floor. The laundry's downstairs. Wi-Fi password on the back, she said, smiling in that effortless way I didn't yet know how to return. The room was small but bright, with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out onto a courtyard full of sunburned grass. I unpacked slowly, stacking my books and tapping my grandmother's bus schedule above the desk where an American calendar might have gone. My passport sat in the drawer under it, visible, reachable, mine. For a long time, I just looked at it. Proof that I could keep something safe without having to apologize. That night, I walked to the campus convenience store for groceries. At the checkout, the cashier, an older black woman with laugh lines like parentheses, looked at the contents of my basket. Instant noodles, eggs, tea bags, a small bottle of soy sauce. First week, she asked. Is it that obvious? I said, and she smiled. Don't worry. You'll learn which noodles are worth the salt. Something about the kindness of strangers hurt more than cruelty ever had. I smiled back, paid, and walked home under a sky that didn't feel like it belonged to anyone. Classes started the next week. My assistantship assignment came through. 20 hours a week in the writing center, tutoring first-year students and managing the online portal. My supervisor, a woman named Dr. Patel, spoke in clipped, musical sentences that made feedback sound like encouragement. You're precise, she told me after our first session. That's good. American students don't need flattery. They need honesty that doesn't bite. I learned quickly how to navigate students who mistook politeness for approval, how to reword advice until it landed, how to juggle deadlines and homesickness and a stipend that disappeared as soon as rent was paid. Some nights I cried quietly into my pillow, not from regret but from the weight of all the newness. My grandmother's calls helped. She never asked if I was happy, only if I was eating enough. Happiness is a thing for later, she'd say. First, you build the bones of it. I built them, one small act at a time. There were moments of joy, too. My first day on a seminar paper about multilingual pedagogy. My first real winter coat. My first friend, a Brazilian girl named Luisa who lived 2 doors down and swore loudly in 3 languages when she burned her rice. We ate together, shared stories of parents who loved too loudly and too conditionally. She said, "My mother cries every time I don't answer her calls." And I laughed harder than I'd meant to. Mine sends voice notes of prayers instead, I said. We decided they were the same thing in different packaging. In late November, the first snow fell. I'd never seen it before. I stood by the window at 3 in the morning, watching flakes spiral like ash, each one dissolving against the glass. The world outside looked paused, as if someone had held their breath. I thought of my grandmother's apartment, the steamed-up windows, the kettle that never stopped boiling. I thought of my parents' house, the sound of my father's slippers, my mother's quiet sighs. I didn't miss them, not exactly, but sometimes the absence of anger feels like emptiness, too. Around that time, my father started sending short messages again. Hope you're studying hard. Remember to call your mother. Send your grades when you can. I didn't reply at first. Then one evening, after a long tutoring shift, I typed back, "I'm doing well. Classes are good. Hope you're both healthy." It was the smallest olive branch, trimmed of guilt and apology. He didn't respond, and somehow that was fine. By the second semester, I'd learned to live within numbers. The stipend, the rent, the grocery bill, the hours I could legally work without breaking visa rules. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. The writing center job expanded. Dr. Patel asked if I could take on 2 new workshops. "You've got presence," she said. "Students listen to you." I laughed. "I think they're just scared of me correcting their commas." She smiled. "That's leadership." When the semester ended, I received an email from the department. "You've been recommended for a full teaching assistantship next year. Congratulations." The subject line might as well have read, "You did it." That night, I called my grandmother. The connection was bad, her voice breaking up between static and pride. "You see," she said, "you don't need anyone to hold your key." "I had you," I said. "That's different," she replied. "I only remind you that the door exists. You opened it." It was almost midnight when my phone buzzed again, a message from my mother. "Your father is in hospital. Not serious. High blood pressure. He says he misses you." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, slowly, I wrote back, "I hope he recovers soon. I'll call tomorrow." The call the next day was short. My mother answered, her voice tired. "He's better now. The doctor said he needs to rest." "Good," I said. Then, softly, "He asked if you're coming home for summer." "I can't," I said. "I have to teach, and I think it's better this way for now." She didn't argue. "Your grandmother's proud," she said instead. "She tells everyone at the market her granddaughter's a professor in America." "She exaggerates," I said, smiling. "She has that right," my mother said quietly. Something in her tone made me think of the night she'd stood outside my door with a bowl of congee, of the exhaustion that wasn't only hers. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her, just understanding, the kind that arrives too late to fix anything, but early enough to make peace with the past. When the school year ended, the writing center hosted a small party for the staff. There were cupcakes, paper cups of punch, and the kind of laughter that comes from shared survival. Dr. Patel raised a toast. To first-generation scholars who built their own scaffolds, to those who arrived carrying stories that didn't fit on their visa forms. Everyone clapped. I did too, and my palms stung in the best way. That night, walking home through the warm June air, I thought about how far I'd come, from begging for my own gift money to earning my own paycheck, from being a daughter defined by debt to a woman defined by choice. Freedom wasn't loud. It was quiet, slow, deliberate, like breathing in a language you've finally learned to trust. When I reached my apartment, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a single note, written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. "Keep going. The key works both ways. You can always come home, but never forget you left for a reason." I sat on the floor and cried. Not the loud kind, but the soft, grateful kind that doesn't need to explain itself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The email came in the middle of my morning office hours, buried between drafts of student essays and departmental reminders about next semester's schedules. The subject line was simple: "From your mother, urgent." My pulse stuttered before I even opened it. Inside, the message was short. "Your grandmother fell last night. She's in hospital. Stable but weak. Call when you can." There are moments that split you cleanly in two, before and after. Before, I was explaining to a sophomore why their thesis didn't need the word "very" 4 times in one sentence. After, I was somewhere else entirely, trying to breathe through a fog that tasted like panic and disbelief. I left the writing center early. The walk home blurred. Concrete, wind, traffic, faces that didn't know they were crossing a world that had just cracked open for me. In my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed and called home. My mother's voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "She's awake," she said, "but tired. The doctor says she needs rest and monitoring. She keeps asking if you've eaten." Of course she did. I asked if I could speak to her, but my mother said she was sleeping. "I'll tell her you called," she said. "She'll be happy." When we hung up, the silence filled with all the things I hadn't said yet. Over the next few days, I lived in 2 time zones, body in America, mind in a hospital room halfway across the world. Every night I called at 9 p.m., which was morning for them. Sometimes she was awake enough to talk. Sometimes my mother said she was resting. When she did pick up, her voice was soft, like tissue paper. "Popo, it's me," I said one night. "Ah," she breathed, and I could hear the smile even through the static. "My professor." I swallowed hard. "Don't call me that." "Then what should I call you?" "My brave girl." "That's worse," I said, but I was smiling. She laughed, a sound thinner now, but still bright. "You sound tired," she said. "I'm fine, just busy." "You must be eating noodles again." "How do you know?" "Because you always eat noodles when you miss home." I didn't argue. She was right. Before hanging up, she said, "You know, the first time I held you, I prayed you. Never be afraid of doors. Maybe I prayed too hard." "What do you mean?" "You learn to walk through them," she said, "but not how to look back without guilt." Her words landed heavy and true. Weeks passed. Her condition fluctuated, better one day, worse the next. My mother's updates were vague, as if too much honesty might make the distance grow. "She's sleeping more," she said once. "She forgets sometimes what day it is." I wanted to go home. Every instinct screamed it. But my visa status was complicated, my teaching contract still active, and my stipend would freeze if I left mid-semester. Logic said to wait. My heart disagreed. One night, after gradding until my eyes blurred, I called my father. It had been months since our last conversation, but his voice was exactly the same, calm, practiced, distant. "She's asking for you," he said. "You should come soon." "I can't yet," I whispered. "Then don't wait too long." It wasn't an accusation. It was a warning wrapped in weariness. The department was kind when I told them. Dr. Patel said, "Go home. We'll hold your position if you return within 2 months." The international office confirmed they could pause my visa for family emergency. Even the airline agent sounded gentle when she helped me book the earliest flight. On the day I left, the city was soaked in rain. I wore the same coat I'd arrived in 2 years before, but it felt different on me now, not armor, just clothing. At the airport, I sent one last text to Louisa, "Going home for a bit, not sure how long." She replied instantly, "Text when you land. And eat something that's not noodles, woman." I smiled at the screen, even as tears blurred the letters. The flight was long and quiet. I didn't sleep. I thought about the last time I'd left this country, the tension, the shouting, the safe that had held my passport hostage. I'd promised myself I wouldn't come back until I could walk through that door without bowing my head. Now I was returning, because the one person who'd set me free might be slipping away. When the plane landed, the humid air hit me like memory. My mother was waiting in the arrivals hall, her face pale with relief and exhaustion. "She's still holding on," she said. We rode in silence through streets that felt smaller than I remembered. The city looked unchanged, but I wasn't the same person seeing it. When we reached the hospital, my father was sitting outside the room, staring at his hands. He looked older, his hair grayer, his posture bent. When he saw me, something in his face flickered, and for the first time I saw not authority but fatigue. "You came," he said quietly. "I had to," I replied. He nodded. "She's been waiting." Inside, the room smelled of antiseptic and sweet tea. My grandmother looked fragile but alert, her eyes finding me instantly. "Ah," she said softly, reaching out. "My girl." I took her hand. It was cool, thin, but still strong in the way love is strong even when bodies fail. "You came all this way," she whispered. "Of course. I told you the key works both ways." I smiled through tears. "You were right." We talked until she tired, about my students, the snow, the taste of American bread she'd never understand. She dozed off mid-sentence, her hand still resting in mine. My mother touched my shoulder. "Stay with her," she said. "She sleeps better when you're here." So I stayed. All night, I sat by her bed, listening to the monitor's hum, the soft rhythm of her breathing syncing with mine. For the first time in years, the house of my childhood felt quiet in the right way. No tension, no threats, just the fragile peace of people learning how to love differently. When dawn came, light spilled over the curtains like mercy. My grandmother stirred, eyes opening briefly. "You're safe," she murmured. "I am," I said. She smiled faintly. "Good." Her hand relaxed in mine. And that was how morning found us. Her asleep, me awake. Both of us finally unafraid. 3 days later, she was gone. The funeral was simple, dignified, exactly as she would have wanted. No extravagance, no wailing, just quiet hymns and the smell of incense. My father spoke briefly, halting, sincere. My mother cried softly beside him. I stood apart, dry-eyed, the grief too large to fit into tears. Afterward, at home, my father poured tea for the family. When the last guest left, he sat beside me. "She loved you," he said. "I know." He nodded, hesitated. "She left something for you." From his pocket, he pulled out a small brass key, identical to the one she'd used to open the safe years ago. "She said you'd know what it's for." I turned it over in my hand, the metal warm from his touch. "She told me it was mine," I said quietly. He nodded again, his voice rough. "She also told me to stop holding what is." We sat there a long time, not as parent and child, but as two people finally learning the same lesson. That night, I went to my grandmother's apartment. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The teacups on the counter, the half-finished crossword, the faint scent of sandalwood. I found her ledger on the table, neat columns of numbers beside handwritten notes. Light bill paid, medicine restocked, bus fare for the girl, keep separate. At At the bottom of the page, in her looping hand, was one final line. Freedom is not distance. It's knowing you can go home without surrendering yourself. I sat there until sunrise, the key in my hand, her words settling into the quiet. I realized then that going back didn't mean undoing what I'd built. It meant carrying it with me, the strength, the defiance, the understanding that love doesn't have to mean obedience. When I returned to America 2 weeks later, the air felt different, lighter. I'd left as someone trying to prove she could stand alone. I came back as someone who knew she already had. At my desk, I placed the brass key beside my grandmother's bus schedule. 2 relics from different lifetimes, both leading me somewhere I belonged. I opened my laptop and began grabbing papers. Outside, snow was starting to fall again, small, silent, endless. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a world away from home. Grief doesn't leave. It only changes its shape. After my grandmother's death, I found myself measuring time differently, not by semesters or deadlines, but by small absences. The hours she used to call. The nights when I'd expect her messages telling me to drink warm water before bed. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't cruel. It felt like a space she'd left on purpose, so I could fill it with something new. The semester resumed like a current that never stops flowing. Students came and went. Papers were written, lectures delivered. I smiled when I was supposed to, but there were moments when the ache broke through, seeing an old woman cross the street too slowly, hearing Mandarin at the grocery store, smelling jasmine tea from the apartment next door. Each time I thought, she'd like this, or she'd scold me for that. One night, after a particularly long day at the writing center, I got a message from my mother. It was short, almost hesitant. Your father has been quiet lately. He talks about you more. I think he's trying. I stared at the words for a while, unsure how to feel. Trying. For my father, that was almost a confession. 2 days later, another message came, this time from him. I found some of your old letters from school. You wrote that you wanted to teach someday. You did it. I'm proud. It was the first time in my life that he'd used that word with me. Proud. I read it twice, 3 times before the tears came. It wasn't the apology I once dreamed of, but maybe it didn't need to be. Some people apologize by learning to soften, by choosing different words, by finally letting silence mean something tender instead of cold. Spring arrived late that year. The campus trees bloomed shyly, pink petals scattering across the sidewalks like confetti. I started spending more time outdoors gratting papers under the magnolias, drinking coffee on the library steps. There was something grounding about the rhythm of it all, life quietly insisting on continuing. One afternoon, as I packed up my things, Dr. Patel joined me. You seem lighter, she said. I think I am, I replied. She nodded. Grief does that eventually. It teaches us to carry love differently. That night, I called my mother. For the first time since the funeral, we spoke without walking around our words. She asked about my students, my meals, the weather. Then, softly, your father wants to send you something. What is it? A small box. He won't say what's inside. Just said it's something your grandmother would have wanted you to have. When the package arrived a week later, it was plain cardboard, carefully taped, the handwriting unmistakably his. Inside, wrapped in layers of old newspaper, was a photograph. It was a black and white portrait. My grandmother, much younger, standing in front of her first apartment holding a baby boy. My father. Her face was bright, unguarded. On the back, she'd written in faded ink, "For the day you understand me." Underneath, the photo was a note from him. She carried both of us longer than she should have. I see that now. Thank you for reminding her what freedom looked like. My hands shook as I folded the paper. I sat there for a long time, the photo resting on my knees, feeling a warmth I hadn't known I still had room for. By summer, I'd finished my first year of teaching. The department renewed my position for another 2 years. I started mentoring new international students, showing them where to find the cheapest groceries, how to apply for library jobs, which buses ran after midnight. They reminded me of myself when I first arrived, unsure, hungry, holding their independence like something fragile. One of them, a nervous girl from Malaysia, asked me after our first meeting, "How do you deal with missing home?" I thought about it. "You don't stop missing it," I said, "but you learn to build another one here piece by piece." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I hope I can be as brave as you." I smiled. "You already are, you're here." After she left, I realized that was exactly what my grandmother had done for me. She'd handed me the courage to show others the way. In July, I finally flew home again, not out of obligation this time, but choice. The flight felt different. No guilt, no fear, just the quiet anticipation of returning without losing myself. When I arrived, my father met me at the gate. No speech, no lecture, just a nod and a small wave. He looked older but softer too, as if time had sanded down the edges of his pride. At home, my mother had cooked too much, as always. "Eat first," she said, pressing a bowl into my hands. The taste of home flooded my mouth, ginger, soy, and memory. After dinner, my father gestured toward the living room. Come, he said. I want to show you something. He opened the old safe, the same one that had once held my passport hostage. Inside, where stacks of documents used to sit, there was only one thing now. A folded red envelope. He handed it to me. It's what's left of your grandmother's savings, he said. She wanted you to use it for something meaningful, not to pay anyone back, just for you. I took it slowly. You're sure? He nodded. I think I finally understand what she meant about letting go. I didn't speak. I just reached out and touched his hand, a small gesture, but enough. That night, I sat by my old bedroom window. Outside, the cicadas hummed, the same summer song that had once marked my childhood. I thought about everything that had happened, the money, the passport, the arguments, the leaving, the loss. It all seemed distant now, softened by understanding. I opened my grandmother's ledger, the one I'd brought back after the funeral, and placed the red envelope inside. Then I wrote one final note on the last page. She was right. Freedom isn't distance, it's peace. When I closed the book, I realized I didn't need to run anymore. I could stay for a while, then go again, and both would feel like home. The next morning, my father drove me to the airport. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. As he unloaded my suitcase, he said quietly, "You don't owe us anything. Just live well." "I will," I said. He smiled, small and tired, but genuine. Your grandmother would have liked that answer. I watched him drive away, sunlight glinting off the windshield until the car disappeared into traffic. Then I turned toward the terminal, passport in hand, and walked forward. On the flight back to America, I looked out the window as the plane rose above the clouds. Below me, two worlds stretched apart, the one I came from and the one I'd built. For the first time, they didn't feel like opposites. They felt like parts of the same story. I closed my eyes and whispered the words that had carried me through it all, my grandmother's voice, still steady in memory. Your wings aren't for storage. And this time, they finally felt like they belonged to me.